So based on the lack of online buzz, and the fact that numerous people told me last week in my comments section that they had no idea that The Mandalorian was even on again, it's safe to say that interest in The Mandalorian and Star Wars is pretty much at an all-time low. I haven't even really seen the fake manufactured hype I typically see on Twitter that is usually associated with series like this. So the question is there anything that could be done to reinvigorate the buzz around this show? And the answer to that question is probably not. But let's discuss.
I watch so you don't have to.
Before I get started, I'd like to kindly ask that you hit the like button and please subscribe to the channel for more content just like this.
Do or do not. There is no try.
So after last week's less than enthusiastic overall reaction to episode 1, the Shill media is out in full force trying to make sense of it all. Because as we all know by now, it is their job to make excuses for subpar content. Case in point, this article was released that said Star Wars fans can't enjoy The Mandalorian thanks to Andor. Basically insinuating that fans are now comparing The Mandalorian to Andor, and because of Andor's supposed high quality, people are now not looking at The Mandalorian so favorably.
But why?
Now I see two issues with this logic. For one, your argument kind of collapses on itself, because you're basically saying that people are starting to realize how mediocre The Mandalorian actually is. If that's all it takes for people to start rightfully criticizing this show, then maybe it wasn't that good of a show to begin with.
That makes sense.
The second issue I see with this logic is regardless of what some people say or think about Andor, the reality of the situation is that nobody even cared enough about Andor to watch it. So again, you're kind of inadvertently wrecking The Mandalorian without even trying to. It's literally a self-own. Disney Star Wars is truly in a bad way right now. That being said, I noticed this week a slight shift in energy as it pertains to the media. And you know how I always say that you know something is bad when even the shills can't defend it?
Oh, you're right. And when you're right, you're right. And you're always right.
Well, look what I found in regards to this week's episode. IGN, the shill of all shill sites, gave episode 2 of season 3 of The Mandalorian a whopping 5. That's right, the publication that rarely gives anything less than an 8. They actually gave a Disney Star Wars production an average rating. My guess would be the Disney check didn't clear this week. Or maybe, just maybe, critics are finally starting to be honest again. I'm pretty sure it's the first one.
I find your lack of faith disturbing.
Anyway, we'll monitor this situation to see how it plays out in the coming weeks. But do you want to hear the irony in all of this? This episode that got review bombed by IGN, I can use that term, right? In my opinion, actually had some decent things in it. Now don't get me wrong, the show is still average at best. So actually the IGN rating is probably pretty spot on. But when you only give one episode an average rating, when the show is pretty average most of the time, it kind of ruins the credibility of your review process.
Congratulations, you played yourself.
I think the biggest issue I have with their rating is the reasons they gave for giving it a 5. The darkness of the Mines of Mandalore might have been meant to establish a horror mood, but it makes fights nearly unwatchable and dulls the impact of emotional conversations. Its focus on nostalgia and questionable visuals blunts what should have been a far more powerful moment for the series. Now I'm going to be honest with you, I've heard this complaint about other shows like House of the Dragon last year, and I do believe in that case those complaints were justified because there was moments in some of those episodes where I couldn't see anything. I actually had a similar complaint about Netflix's Daredevil. Most of the time when I was watching that show, I felt like Daredevil because, again, I couldn't see anything. But as far as this episode of The Mandalorian goes, I really didn't have a problem seeing anything. Who wrote this review? Stevie Wonder?
Ha ha, very funny, motherfucker.
And yes, it did add a horror mood to the episode, and that was a nice change of pace for me. In fact, I actually enjoyed a lot of the visuals in this episode, from the set design of the Mandalore caverns, to some of the creature designs. For a moment, I actually felt like I was watching Star Wars again. It makes me wonder what could have been with this show. If they went with a more bounty hunter focused story, where we could constantly explore new and exciting worlds, instead of just turning it into adventures in babysitting on Tatooine.
Don't with the babysitter.
It was cool seeing something different for once. New creatures, new enemies, new environments. Make this world feel bigger like it used to feel. Although I will admit the chud creatures that Mando fights did look a bit goofy to me. Like cheap cosplay outfits, and maybe that's why the episode was a little bit darker, to try to hide some of those bad costumes.
What the hell am I looking at? When does this happen in the movie?
On the flip side of things though, the unnamed Grievous-like enemy that was a half-droid, half-organic character with a giant mech spider tank-like vehicle, that actually was pretty cool. So in that instance, you win some and you lose some with the visuals. As for IGN's claim of too big of a focus on nostalgia, I didn't get that at all watching this. Believe it or not, this was one of the only times that a Mando episode didn't feel formulaic to me.
Surely you can't be serious.
I am serious. And don't call me Shirley.
It felt like we were getting right to the point and Mando was trying to complete his mission without getting sidetracked. Now I will say that this episode does completely abandon some of the ideas set up in episode 1, all because of bad writing reasons, I presume. All that talk about rebuilding the IG robot pretty much went nowhere, because he ended up getting a new droid anyway, which is what everyone was telling him to do. So again, thank you for wasting our time.
Don't waste my time!
I will admit that the Mandalorian lore aspect of this episode did feel a bit glossed over, so that was a bit of a missed opportunity for me. Going to Mandalore should have felt like a much bigger deal than this episode portrays it as. And it did start to get a bit redundant when Mando kept getting himself in trouble, and Bo-Katan had to keep coming along and saving him. Whose show is this anyway? I do think this episode deserves to be criticized, but as usual when IGN does something good, they still typically find a way to mess it up.
What an idiot! Oh, what a loser!
I'm a little bit shocked that this episode, of all episodes, is the one that they decided to give a lower rating to. To me, this was a marginal improvement over last week, even if a lot of the dumb writing issues still exist. Like the whole lesson that Mando has for Grogu when he talks about how Mandalorians have to understand maps so they don't get lost. Designed as a convenient, teachable moment for Grogu that he will later use later in this very episode. That, my friends, is called plot convenience. Not to mention, understanding maps is pretty much something that everyone who flies a ship should probably know how to do. So basically anyone could be a Mandalorian, I guess. If Rey can choose to be a Skywalker, then anyone with a GPS can choose to be a Mandalorian.
I'm a dude playing a dude disguised as another dude.
Bottom line, even with some interesting things sprinkled throughout this episode, it won't be enough to change anyone's mind about the current state of Disney Star Wars. The same issues are there and they probably always will be. And it's going to take a lot more than a slight deviation from the formula and some lighting issues to change everyone's mind on that.
Y'all be cool. Right on.